There is one type of spirit that I haven't addressed yet in detail. I've mentioned it before, but that's the spirit of condemnation. Now, first of all, this paranormal parasite can only operate to you or through you if you have condemnation in your thinking. That's why it's a spirit of condemnation, because it works to enable and enforce condemnation. Now, condemnation, when it comes down to it, is simply a belief. It's nothing more than a belief, but this belief has a powerful outworking that is self-destructive. So it's a self-destructive belief. And the self-destructive belief of condemnation comes down to the following: that God cannot be trusted. And because God cannot be trusted, God does not love you. God does not have his best interest at heart for you. So this belief of condemnation causes you to look for something else to trust besides God. And this belief is one of the root beliefs that keep people trapped. Condemnation is a belief that goes so far that you begin to believe for sure that you deserve bad stuff happening to you. That's how far condemnation goes. Because condemnation itself is a backwards way of thinking. It's a root, until this, it's a root that leads to other dysfunctional ways of thinking. And here's the thing: condemnation is a counterfeit of conviction. When the Holy Spirit convicts someone, the Holy Spirit is empowering someone towards the positive, towards reality. Yes, the bad is highlighted, but only to lead someone into better. Condemnation highlights what's wrong to draw someone into destruction, while it gives the appearance that someone is being ministered onto. You see the difference? So condemnation is a belief that's antichrist. It's not biblical. It doesn't even add up naturally when you think about it. But this belief is the common belief amongst mankind, that God cannot be trusted. I mean, just look around you. How many religions are there? How many denominations are there in each religion? How many cults are there out there? People are looking for security in all the wrong places because they have a deep-rooted belief that God cannot be trusted. And why can't you trust God? Because God is out there to get you, to kill you. What really comes down to is that the narcissistic, abusive tendencies of mankind are projected onto the Most High. And that projection is reflected back onto us. And this reflection back onto us is this belief called condemnation. It's really the darkness of mankind that's reflected back onto us, because we observe things through this darkness, because we're not delivered from it. So all unbelievers have this mind construct of condemnation, but it doesn't work out the same way with everyone. Some have this mind construct of condemnation and they're quite at ease, quite optimistic, because they're in denial of bad facts. They already repress knowledge of bad facts. Others have this mindset of condemnation and they're very pessimistic and they don't want to see any good, because they're so attached to feeling bad about themselves. They're so attached to self-pity that anything good they perceive as a threat. So both now have this mind construct of condemnation, but it works out differently with them. And the spirit of condemnation is an entity that attaches itself to you to remind you of this hoax called condemnation. Because it's a hoax. It's not real. However, due to the hardening of the heart, due to the darkness that's in the minds of those that are not saved, they perceive this false belief to be a true statement. That's why worldly people worship their gods by seeking validation from their gods. That's why they work hard to bring sacrifices unto their gods, to prove to their gods they are worthy. This whole mentality of having to prove yourself that you're worthy is rooted in condemnation. It's rooted in unbelief. This type of thinking is used often in the world, and it works. You can motivate people in such a manner. You can. Advertisement uses this longing to be approved that people have to motivate people to buy certain products that they really don't need. So this condemnation belief is used by pagans in the world to motivate people. It works indeed. You can get people to get A's on their reports. You can get people to work far harder than they should. So it is productive, but it only gives a short-term bliss that's followed by many fatal and self-destructive side effects. This condemnation myth, because it's a myth, is common in parent-child relationships in many cultures, in which the child has to venerate the parents as if the parent is a god. And any failure of the child, whether the child is a grown man or grown woman or still living as a teenager or as a child with the parents, it doesn't matter. Any failure on the child's behalf to please the parent is seen as a grave insult to the community. And the community will retaliate against the child for not being able to please the parent. And the retaliation in a form of social exclusion or social rejection can be so strong that some of the children decide to kill themselves because they can't live in the community anymore like that, and emotional pain is too much. They want it all to end. You have cultures like that. In Asia you have them a lot. But I'm not going into the cultural analysis right now. I'm just pointing out condemnation is a myth. Yet it's one of those powerful myths that are so powerful we don't even notice it's a myth. We don't even notice it's there. Until someone exposes this lie, as I'm doing now. And let me tell you, demons get angry when you expose this lie of condemnation because it's a very precious lie that they need people to believe in. The moment you believe in condemnation, you can't walk by faith. You can't, because to walk by faith implies that you agree with Christ. And you can't agree with someone that you don't trust. So if you don't trust God, how can you agree with Christ? You can't. So the only thing that's left for you are counterfeits. Because you can't walk by faith. You can't operate in the spirituality, which is supernatural. So you're left with the paranormal, which is the counterfeit rule of evil spirits. And in the counterfeit rule of evil spirits, it's all about your works, all about your efforts, all about you making it. Because you don't rely upon Christ, who made it on your behalf. You don't benefit of Christ's victory, because you can't receive, because you don't trust Him. Look, condemnation is one of those myths that people fail to see for the dangerous story it really is. Condemnation is used in the world to motivate so-called good behavior. Now let me tell you, that's not possible. You can't use a belief that's so self-destructive to motivate good. You can't do it. You can motivate someone to not do certain things, so you can deter certain behaviors. But the deterrence will only work for a while. You have not built anyone up in any good direction. Punishment, inflicting pain and harm on someone because they didn't comply with your expectations. Human beings are obsessed with this. We have a whole legal system built on punishment. And punishment indeed deters people from acting on certain impulses, but it does not bring any healing. It does not lead people into any good direction. How many people have been sent to prison and they're still crying? How many people have been executed, but people still murder, they still kill, they still cheat, they still do all of that. I am not saying that extreme cases that are very dangerous shouldn't be removed from the human community. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that killing them is the answer. If they have to be removed and put in some prison complex for a while, then that's needed. If someone is mentally ill and is mentally broken down and they can't help themselves, then the community needs to help them. So I'm not saying that it's completely useless to have things like prison complexes and all of that. However, people have gone way too far into thinking that just locking people up or executing people is going to solve everything. It doesn't. It only distracts people from seeing what's going on. People, collectively and individually, tend to deal with the fruits of stuff instead of dealing with the roots. Now, condemnation is one of the roots of much harm that happens in the world, also among believers. Because let me tell you, a lot of believers are holding on to church doctrine. A lot of believers have not been delivered from relief seeking. They have not been delivered from seeking validation externally. They haven't. So condemnation still has a strong hold on them. So those believers, they go to church every Sunday or every Sabbath, and they think there's power in obeying church doctrine. And there's power indeed, but it's not the power of God. It's not the power of the Holy Spirit. It's paranormal aid that they receive. But because the paranormal aid comes in the name of Christ and it is powerful, they think it's from God. It's not from God. That is how the enemy deceives many people, including believers. Condemnation also distorts your perception, in which you can't see the difference between natural obligations or natural responsibility and constructive responsibilities. Now, constructive responsibilities are responsibilities that come into existence due to agreements in a community. There's nothing wrong with a constructive responsibility, and there's nothing wrong with expecting constructive responsibilities from other people, as long as you can justify it and as long as you can give an account for it. The moment a constructive responsibility becomes toxic or it endangers human health and human safety, it ought to be discarded. But a lot of folks don't even know they have natural responsibilities towards themselves, towards their fellow human beings, towards Christ himself. Why? Because they're blinded. And the rulers, who are pagans that rule them, want to keep them away from Christ. And because people don't see the difference between a natural obligation and a constructed obligation, because of that, there's this fruit of condemnation that enters in, which is called guilt. And guilt opens you up to many other unclean spirits. Guilt opens you up to confusion, because guilt itself is a form of confusion. The other side of the coin, the other side of guilt is shame. So both guilt and shame are an outworking of condemnation, because they're two sides of the same coin, and that coin comes from this myth called condemnation. And look at this further. Shame opens up the door for the spirit of envy or invidious spirits. I've spoken about those entities before. Because when you're in shame, shame and guilt are two sides of the same coin. Even though both work out differently, it's still the same coin. When you're in shame, you become far more sensitive to the opinions and the approval of others, more than you would acknowledge yourself, more than you're realizing yourself. And once this is the case, you get drawn into this mindset of comparing. You'll be constantly comparing yourself with others. You become narcissistic because of this thing called shame. I'm not saying you've become a narcissist, but you become narcissistic. Even though you're not a narcissist, you still become narcissistic, so you become self-centered, so you can't think straight anymore. And in this state of thinking the spirit of envy or invidious spirits begin to operate through you. Suddenly, you feel angry with someone else's success or someone else's advantage. Let me give an illustration. It can be that Suzanne sees Clara, and Clara is talking to some exchange student from Malaysia. And this exchange student from Malaysia already has a PhD, but she is now reschooling herself into another field. Now, Suzanne had no particular interest in anything concerning this Malaysian exchange student. She's not even interested in the region. But now that she sees Clara, one of her friends, interact with this foreign exchange student, now she becomes upset. Now she feels hurt. Now she feels betrayed. She's triggered now. Why? Because she is in condemnation, and guilt and shame are operating in her thinking. That's how she filters things. And she now perceives the developing friendship between Clara, which is one of her friends, and that exchange student as a disadvantage to her. She begins to think, why don't I have foreign exchange students getting interested in me? Now hold on a minute. This Malaysian student was not relevant to Suzanne to begin with. How come she is suddenly so important? Well, she isn't so important to Suzanne. It is because Suzanne has a faulty perception of herself, which is not in line with Christ, and this faulty perception needs validation so much. So now that someone else is validated and not her, she feels rejected, she feels in danger, she feels trapped. So now, because she feels threatened, she feels endangered, invidious spirits begin to whisper in her ears, or better said, telepathically transfer messages into her brain. Messages like, do you see that foreign exchange student over there, Suzanne? She is so into your friend Clara. The reason why she is so into your friend Clara because your friend Clara is far more beautiful than you. Let's just look at you. You're ugly. You look like crap. You don't take care of yourself. Things like that, the demon will begin to whisper into her brains. Because Suzanne has no spiritual insight whatsoever, she will hear these messages in her brain, and because these messages come in the sound of her own voice, she thinks that she's the one thinking these thoughts. She still has her reflective, I'm saying this, her mind can still reflect on it and think, hold on a minute, it doesn't add up. But because Suzanne is already confused, she will likely agree with this voice that's speaking to her, which is an invidious spirit, a spirit of envy. And once she agrees with it, she is now envious of her friend Clara. She is. Because she's now in agreement with that evil spirit can now transfer all kinds of happiness onto her. And because of because of Suzanne's false perception, she will now perceive all this happiness as coming from her friend Clara. So after a while, she'll be convinced that action must be taken against Clara. So she will turn on Clara just to prevent her from growing too much or advancing too much. She may even think she's doing it for her own good. That is how the spirit of envy gets a hold of people. And condemnation is at the root. You see how dangerous condemnation is? Look what happened to Cain and Abel. Cain has his perception of himself, which was not in line with Christ, which was not true. Instead of receiving the truth correctly and be delivered, he held on. His choice of holding on caused contention inside of him. This contention leaked out in physical violence that led to the murder of his brother. So he triggered himself into violence. So he was responsible for it. Now, in the parable I just gave unto you of this Suzanne, Clara, and this Malaysian exchange student, in this case, Clara is not even aware that her friend Suzanne is turning on her. That Malaysian exchange student may notice some weird looks from this Suzanne, but she thinks, oh, well, it's really nothing. I don't really know her, this woman. But this Suzanne, she is responsible for giving in to these wrong assumptions. Now, don't get me wrong, it's an unclean spirit using her. But nevertheless, the unclean spirit can only use her because she has some dark agreements in her mind. And she's responsible for holding on to these dark agreements. So even though she initially didn't intend to harm Clara, she will end up harming Clara, her friend, because she agrees with dark statements, and these dark statements enable the spirit of envy. So she'll be acting out the longings of the spirit of envy. She will. So she is responsible for looking for safety. There are people out there who are envious themselves because they choose to think of themselves as something, and when people don't agree with it, they lash out. Those are narcissists. But just understand the following: you don't have to be a narcissist to operate in envy. There are many non-narcissists out there that operate in envy, and things get very ugly. But I've shown you the root of envy now is condemnation. And here's the thing: that unclean spirit, the spirit of envy, was telling complete BS to this Suzanne, because Suzanne was a good looking woman and she did take care of herself quite good. So the reason why Suzanne fell for this BS, this unclean spirit, was because of the faulty perspective of herself, which was not in line with Christ. Her perception of herself was that she was someone if the community agreed with it, or she was someone if she could defend her claims, instead of realizing that she is someone because Christ died in her place to redeem her, and that Christ has risen from the dead on her behalf, and she only has to rely on him to receive his power, to walk in his power. If she would believe that, if she would believe the gospel, condemnation would disappear. Now, they are believers, they are born again, but condemnation is still there. They haven't fully renewed their mind around the gospel. So you have people that believe that Christ died for them and rose again, all of that. So they have become born again, but they have not been delivered yet. When you truly believe the gospel, the good news, condemnation is driven out from your thinking. Darkness will be driven out from you. That's why you ought to be renewed in your mind. Here's another thing about condemnation. Condemnation will lead you to many compulsive behaviors that will destroy you. For example, some people develop the attitude that they need to hurt others before others can hurt them. It may work in practice. People learn not to mess with you and all of that in the streets out there. It may work in the ghetto, but it's self-destructive because you're operating in the negative and you are initiating hostility towards you. But because you don't trust other people, you have this pathological distrust of others, because condemnation automatically leads to pathological distrust of others sooner or later. There are many people in which it leads to pathological distrust later, but sooner or later condemnation will lead to pathological distrust. And this pathological distrust manifests itself collectively in things like racism, in things like discrimination. Those things are the fruit of condemnation. This pathological distrust can then be used by scammers and conmen in the world to lead people into all types of religions or in all kinds of false teachings. And in politics, this pathological distrust is exploited. It happens all the time. Also in the corporate world, it's being used. And here's another thing. The porn industry is based on pathological distrust. I may need to make a separate video about that, but let me tell you, the porn industry, which is not reflecting natural sexuality, the porn industry is reflecting satanic sex rituals. That is what pornography is revealing. The porn industry is all about enacting, let's say it's all about triggering, enacting, and maintaining pathological distrust in men. That is the purpose of pornography. I made videos about pornography in the past in which I explained that pornography isn't just the picture of a naked man or naked woman. It's not even two, let's say two people, a man and a woman, having sex together, and that's being filmed. Even that is not pornography. Pornography is when something is being revealed, let's say, something's being transferred onto you that's not true, but at the same time you're convinced that if you don't have it, something is wrong with you. So condemnation is at the root. So now you have this pathological distrust that if you don't get it the way it has been represented onto you, that something's wrong with you. So now you begin to pathologically distrust yourself as a man. So when you have natural sexual intercourse with your wife, for example, these messages of pathological distrust that these porn movies has transferred onto you will affect your sexual life with your spouse. And what will happen? There will be domestic violence and all of those other plagues coming on you. Maybe I need to make a separate video about it, but just remember this. The porn industry is all about keeping men in pathological distrust. And here's another thing I want to reveal onto you. Many of those so-called female porn stars are not even female. They are warlocks. Tranny warlocks. So what you're seeing is not natural sex between a man and what you are seeing is a warlock, a man who is sold out to Satan, who worships Apollo, the Antichrist, who is filled with demons, pretending to be a woman. Some of them even had surgery and took hormones to appear like a woman, or some use magical potions to reform their bodies, to morph their bodies, but that's a whole nother subject. But anyway, it's a warlock with a male actor who often is a male prostitute himself. Actually, he is a male prostitute, and they are performing a ritual to worship Apollo, who is the Antichrist. So what you're seeing is a sex ritual, or I'm saying it's a sodomy ritual, presented onto you as perfect sex. So you're being sold something that ain't true, but your mind perceives it as true. And at the same time, you get the feeling, I'm missing out on something. So there's pathological distrust being enforced on you without you being aware of it. But this pathological distrust will work out in your relationships, whether you're aware of it or not. Why do pagans do this? To keep the male population in the negative. Because once you're in the negative, once you have pathological distrust, demons can easily access you. And demons can feed off you because demons need male energy. They need to steal male energy to energize their paranormal rule. They need it. Satan needs it. Now look, you have a lot of men out there who are married or they have long-term relationships with their girlfriends, but they have porn addictions or they have porn issues. And you may think, hold on a minute, you have your physical woman with you that you're sleeping with. So why would you need to look at this virtual thing? That reveals that it has nothing to do with biological, physical sex. It has to do with a stronghold in the mind. And condemnation is the root of it. Besides this, there are also many women out there who have porn issues. So it's not only affecting men now, it's also affecting women. That's how far the enemy has gone. I could go for hours talking about the fruits of this myth called condemnation, but I hope it has been clear to you now, the past half hour you've been listening to this, that condemnation is a hoax, is a terrible hoax, that's antichrist, is diabolical, and it needs to go. So be renewed in your mind. And one more thing I want to say about the porn industry. The porn industry is run by pagans. That's why they use the rabbit as their symbol, because the rabbit refers to Danus. Danus was the younger brother of Apollo, which is also called Hermes, which according to scripture is the false prophet, or the messenger of the gods, as he's called by the Greeks. So porn is evil. There's a difference between nude art and just nudity and porn. If you don't know the difference, educate yourself, look it up. Okay? Okay, that's it for now. Agree with Christ and be at peace.